Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe so I can tell more interesting stories. Now let's get started. I always thought the clouds were softy, like cotton candy or warm pillows. That's what they look like from the ground, floating gently above the world, like lazy daydreams. But from the window of a plane, there's something else entirely: cold, dense, wild things. Not so gentle when you're flying right through them. It was Christmas Eve, 1971. I was 17. My mother and I were flying from Lima to Pucallpa, Peru. We were going to see my father spend the holidays together at his research station in the jungle. It was supposed to be a short flight, just an hour or so. Nothing to worry about unless you're superstitious, because the airline was LANSA, and LANSA didn't have the best track record. Let's just say their safety history would make a seatbelt nervous. The plane was packed, full of families, kids, tourists, and people carrying wrapped presents in their laps. I was wearing a white and blue patterned summer dress. My mother sat beside me, calm as ever. She always trusted science, and I trusted her. The flight started fine. Then we hit turbulence. And by turbulence, I mean the kind of jolt that makes you wonder if you left the stove on and then realize it doesn't matter anymore. Suddenly, the sky went dark. Thunder cracked so loud it felt like it split the air. Lightning flashed through the windows like paparazzi at a red carpet. Somewhere up front, someone screamed. Another bolt closer. The plane dipped. People gasped. Then came the flash. The plane was struck. The sound was indescribable, like the world cracking open. Then the aircraft started to break apart, wings snapping overhead, compartments exploding, luggage flying like angry birds. And then I wasn't in the plane anymore. No warning, no goodbye, just wind and air and white noise. I was still strapped to my seat, but the rest of the plane gone, torn away. And I was falling. Here's your historical fact of the day. LANSA Flight 508 was hit by lightning, broke apart midair, and crashed into the Peruvian rainforest. Of the 92 people on board, only one survived. That would be me. The fall lasted seconds, maybe minutes. I honestly couldn't tell you. I was spinning tumbling trees, rushing up toward me like a green blur. And the seat was still attached to me, just a flying piece of fuselage. I remember seeing treetops. And then everything went black. Some scholars still debate how I survived the fall. Was it the seat-absorbing impact? The thick rainforest canopy slowing me down? Pure luck? Divine intervention? All of the above? I say sure. Why not all of them? The bizarre fact: scientists later calculated I fell about 2 miles, that's over 10,000 feet, and lived. That's basically being thrown out of a plane without a parachute and landing in a jungle instead of, say, exploding. I didn't know any of that at the time. I just knew I wasn't dead. When I opened my eyes, everything hurt. My head was pounding. My right eye was swollen shut. My collarbone throbbed like it had its own heartbeat. I was lying in the dirt, still buckled into a seat. The seat beside me was empty. The sky above was a tiny crack of light through the treetops. Everything else trees. Leaves, sounds I couldn't place, chirps, screeches, something that sounded like a laugh but probably wasn't. I tried to sit up. My body said no. So I lay there. Somewhere not far off, I could hear water. And I realized this was not over. This was just the beginning. When I finally managed to move, it was like waking up inside a dream where the world forgot its shape. Everything was too loud, or too bright, or too close. I was no longer in a plane. I was in the Amazon rainforest. 17 years old, in a ripped dress, with one sandal, a broken collarbone, and no clue which direction pointed toward anything that wasn't green and hungry. The air was thick, not hot wet, sticky. Breathing felt like sipping soup through my nose. My first real breath sent a wave of nausea straight through my ribs, and I had to pause just to keep from falling over again. Here's your historical fact. The Amazon rainforest is home to more than 400 billion individual trees across more than 16,000 species. And I swear, I met most of them on day one. I stood up slowly. My left eye still refused to open. My right leg was cut, but not broken. I touched my collarbone and winced. It was clearly fractured, protruding slightly, but not poking out of my skin. Yay, for small wins. My glasses were gone, which made the whole jungle melt into a blur of greens, browns, and panic. I looked around for the rest of the plane. Nothing. Just my seat, tilted sideways, a few scattered metal pieces, and the tree canopy so high above, I couldn't even trace how far I'd fallen. I don't remember crying. Not yet. That would come later. What I do remember is saying one thing out loud, Ich lebe. I'm alive. And that's when it hit me. If I was alive, maybe someone else was too. I started calling for my mother, over and over. Mama, mama. My voice echoed off trees and vanished into the noise. Birds squawked in protest. Something rustled, but no answer. I searched the area, stepping slowly, trying not to trip over roots or fall into holes. No wreckage, no voices, just endless green. The bizarre fact for today, I found a bag of candy, soft, squished, and melted. It had landed with me somehow. For the next 10 days, that bag of candy would be my only food. I wouldn't even like that kind of candy back home. Funny how survival makes your taste buds shut up and cooperate. As night fell, I huddled under a fallen log. The sounds of the jungle changed, deepened, sharpened. Insects began their symphony. Something screeched from the treetops. Something else shuffled nearby. I pressed my body against the earth and wrapped my arms around myself like a crumbling statue. Historians still debate whether my familiarity with the rainforest helped save my life. My parents were zoologists. I'd grown up partially in the jungle, spent time at my father's research station. I knew the rules. Follow water. Avoid still ponds. Never eat what you can't name. I just never thought I'd use that knowledge outside a textbook. When morning came, I had a plan. A flimsy, desperate plan, but a plan. Follow the stream. It wasn't deep, just a trickle. But I knew water meant people eventually. Rivers connect to villages. Villages mean help. Maybe boats, maybe radio. The stream was narrow and winding, barely ankle deep, shaded by vines and ferns the size of dinner tables. I stepped carefully. I had one sandal on my right foot and nothing on my left, which quickly began to look like it had been through a cheese grater. I tried hopping. That didn't work. So I kept walking, alternating steps, gritting my teeth with each one. I drank the water. No filter, no boiling. Just straight from the stream. Not ideal, but dehydration doesn't wait for approval. The sun was merciless during the day. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds. My face puffed up from bites. Ants climbed my legs. Somewhere along the way, I stopped flinching at every itch and just accepted that I was now part of the jungle food chain. I didn't speak out loud anymore. I was too tired, too focused on moving, one foot in front of the other. Sometimes I sat beside the water and watched it shimmer. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes in the trees. People, faces, planes. They weren't there, but I kept going. That was the rhythm. Step, swat, sip, breathe, repeat. The jungle didn't hate me. It just didn't care. It was ancient, patient, full of life and death and everything in between. And I was this tiny, lost interruption to its regular programming. On day 3, I passed the first sign of something terrible. A seat from the plane, upside down, empty. I stopped. My hands shook. I was too afraid to look closely. What if it had been someone I knew? What if it had been someone I loved? I didn't check. I just whispered an apology and kept walking. That night, I lay in the roots of a tree with a canopy above that looked like a cracked ceiling. I whispered again, Ich lebe, but I was starting to wonder how much longer that would be true. The jungle never got quieter. It just changed its voice. By the 4th day, I could tell the time of day based on what was screaming. Mornings came with birds that sounded like broken instruments. Afternoons brought buzzing clouds of flies, dragonflies, and mosquitoes that thought I was a buffet. And nights were a playlist of howling hissing and the occasional thump in the trees that sounded way too big to be a squirrel. I was losing track of time. My candy was down to a few sticky pieces in a crumpled wrapper. My lips were cracked. My tongue felt like it had been sandpapered. My feet, especially the barefoot one, were shredded from stones, thorns, and the sheer exhaustion of walking on instinct. But I kept following the stream. It twisted like it had secrets. Every bend felt like a question. Could this be it? Could this lead to someone? But the answer kept being, nope, just more green, more silence. Here's your historical fact of the day. Juliane Koepcke, that's me. I survived. Not just the fall, but 11 days in the rainforest alone. And not a temperate forest. The Amazon, one of the densest, most dangerous ecosystems on Earth. Snakes, piranhas, jaguars, parasites. Oh my. But none of those scared me as much as the loneliness. On the 5th day, I found something that didn't belong to the jungle. It was a row of airplane seats, 3 of them still bolted together. 2 bodies still in them. I didn't want to look, but I had to. One of the women still had her toenails painted red. Her dress fluttered slightly in the breeze. She looked like she was sleeping, but she wasn't. I got closer. I recognized the bag on her lap. My mother's. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My body didn't have the energy for that anymore. I just stood there blinking, whispering, no, no, no. I reached out and touched her arm. It was cold, bruised. And then I sat beside her. For a long time, historians still debate whether I was in shock or whether some ancient part of me had gone quiet for self-preservation. I don't think I was numb. I just paused. Let it land. Let it sit in me like a stone. And then I moved on, not out of coldness, but because staying would have meant giving up. And if she were alive, she'd have told me to go, to find help. I didn't bury her. I couldn't. The ground was too hard. The tools were non-existent. But I whispered goodbye, promised I'd come back, promised I'd tell her story. And I left her there, surrounded by trees, watched over by birds and vines. The bizarre fact for today. Somewhere during that same stretch of jungle, I picked up botfly larvae, tiny insects that lay eggs under the skin. I didn't know it at the time. I just knew I had a cut on my arm that was starting to move. And oh boy, did it move. I kept walking. Every few steps, I'd stop and dip my face in the stream. My left eye was still swollen shut. My right eye had started to blur from infection or exhaustion or both. I could hear my heart sometimes, this slow, echoing thump in my ears that felt like it was counting down to something I didn't want to know. By day 7, I stopped seeing animals. Or maybe I stopped noticing them. I was the ghost now. Just a wandering shadow, in the undergrowth too skinny to be threatening and too slow to be interesting. I didn't have dreams anymore when I slept. Just flashes. My mom's voice. The sound of the plane. My seatbelt buckle. the candy wrappers rustling in my pocket. Sometimes I thought about just lying down, letting the stream carry me away, just to rest, just to stop walking. But something in me wouldn't allow it. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was that stubborn voice that kept whispering, keep going, keep going, keep going. So I did. By the 8th day, my body was no longer cooperating. It was negotiating. Every step required a bargain. Every breath had to be convinced. I had sunburn on top of insect bites, on top of scrapes, on top of bruises. My one sandal was hanging together by threads, but I refused to toss it. It was doing its best. So was I. I kept walking downstream. The logic was still solid, follow the water. It might lead to people. And if not people, then maybe a boat. And if not a boat, then... I didn't let my mind go further than that. The stream was growing wider, deeper in places. I could finally lie in it without scraping my ribs. That cold water was the closest thing I had to relief. I'd float on my back, eyes closed, pretending for a moment I was in a bathtub in Lima. Warm towels, a radio playing something soft, my mom in the kitchen making tea. Then the current would push me gently into a rock, and I'd remember, nope, still in the jungle. Here's your historical fact. For the day, the Amazon rainforest spans over 5.5 million square kilometers, covering parts of 9 countries. It's so dense in some places, rescue helicopters have missed entire crash sites from directly above. It swallows metal, and it nearly swallowed me. I was half dreaming by now, walking in a trance. I'd mumble to myself, carry entire conversations with trees, argue with ants crawling up my arms. I saw flashes of white light in the corner of my vision. I kept thinking I heard footsteps, but no one came. Then something strange, a faint, buzzing, rhythmic, mechanical. Not a bee, not a bird, a chainsaw. I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was another hallucination. But then I saw it, straight lines in the forest. Planks, boards, wood that had been cut. Human hands had been here. I stumbled forward. More debris. A rusty metal barrel. A piece of rope. A trail of boots in the mud. And then out of nowhere, a hut. It looked abandoned at first. Just a thatched roof, rough wooden walls, a few tools lying around. But it was real. Man-made. Civilization, or a hint of it. I leaned against the side and whispered, "Thank you." To what? I don't know. The jungle, the stream, my mother, probably all three. Then I passed out. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke, it was raining. My arm was throbbing. The wound was now infested with maggots. I knew enough not to panic. My father had once told me that maggots, while disgusting, can actually prevent infection. I was not in the mood to appreciate that fact at the time. The bizarre fact for this part, I tried pouring gasoline into the wound to flush the maggots out. Not recommended. Highly flammable. Deeply unpleasant. But hey, it worked. Sort of. I stayed by the hut. Waited. Didn't want to move again. Couldn't really. My feet were swollen. My arm was burning. My eyes still refused to open. I sipped from a rain bucket, pressed my back to the hut wall, and prayed someone would return. That night, I heard voices. Real ones this time. Men speaking Spanish. Laughing. And then the unmistakable sound of boots on wet ground. I tried to shout, but my voice cracked. I waved. They almost didn't see me. Until one of them, bare-chested, holding a machete, froze and pointed. Una niña, a girl. They ran over, stared. I must have looked like a creature from a myth, sunken cheeks, one shoe, torn dress, an infected wound crawling with life. One of them gave me water. Another tried to hold me steady. I remember him saying Dios mío. Historians still debate how long I would have lasted if they hadn't shown up. A day, too. But thankfully, I didn't have to find out. They told me they were local loggers. They'd been working upstream coming back to check on the hut. They'd seen vultures circling, probably drawn by the crash site, and had been expecting to find something awful. Instead, they found me. They took care of me that night, fed me soft food, cleaned my wounds. The next day, they loaded me into a canoe and began the journey downriver. It would take hours. But I didn't care. I was in a boat. I was surrounded by people. And for the first time in 10 days, I didn't feel alone. The river was wide and smooth and endless. It curved like it knew something I didn't like. It had been carrying secrets longer than anyone had been alive. I sat in the canoe between two of the loggers, my head leaning on the side, barely able to sit upright, just letting the current pull us toward wherever the world had been hiding. The man in front of me kept checking to see if I was awake. Every time I blinked, he'd whisper something like, "No te duermas, niña." Don't sleep, little girl. I wasn't planning to, but it felt like my body was constantly fading in and out of dreams. The roar of the river, the smell of wet wood, the pain in my arm, it all blended together like a lullaby made for the barely alive. Here's your historical fact. Of the day, rivers in the Amazon are often the only transportation routes through the jungle. Roads are rare, and trails disappear. If I hadn't found the logging hut near that stream, and if those men hadn't come by when they did, there's a good chance no one would have ever known I was still alive. The ride took hours, maybe longer. I don't remember much of it. Just flashes the way the trees opened up every so often to let the sky in, the dragonflies landing on my arm, the hum of insects that never seemed to take a break. I remember looking down at the water and seeing my reflection. My face didn't look like mine. It looked like something borrowed from a war movie, half swollen, streaked with dirt and dried blood hair, stuck to my face in damp ropes. And then we arrived, a small village hidden in the green with just a few huts and a dirt clearing. I saw people before I heard them. Children running barefoot. A woman with a basket. Someone chopping wood. They all stopped and stared when they saw me. One of the loggers explained what had happened. I didn't catch every word, but I heard avión niña sola 10 días. A girl, a plane, 10 days. The villagers brought me into one of the huts, laid me on a mat, gave me tea made from boiled herbs that tasted like smoke and earth. A woman dabbed at my face with a cool cloth. A child peeked at me from behind the door, then disappeared. And for the first time since the crash, I cried. Not hard, not loud, just quiet tears that ran down my face without warning. My body was done fighting. It had nothing left. And now that I was finally safe, it let me feel everything. The bizarre fact for today: someone tried to give me a piece of roasted monkey. I couldn't eat it. Not because I was disgusted, though, yes, but because my stomach had shrunk to the size of a fist. Even water hurt going down. The next day, a small plane arrived. I don't remember how long the wait was. Could have been 1 day or 3. Time was still doing whatever it wanted. But I remember the sound of that engine overhead, the exact opposite of what I'd heard the last time I was in the sky. This time, it didn't mean destruction. It meant going home. The men lifted me into the aircraft gently, like I was made of wet paper. I looked out the window as we took off, saw the river winding away beneath us, the trees closing ranks around it, like nothing had ever happened. Historians still debate how Juliane Koepcke, 17 injured alone, survived 10 days in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Some call it luck. Some say instinct. Others point to her upbringing in the jungle, the knowledge she carried like second nature. I say this sometimes, The body survives because the heart refuses to quit. We landed in Pucallpa. The airport was a blur. Doctors flashing lights, reporters with microphones already waiting. I remember someone asking, "How did you survive?" and thinking you'll never understand unless you were there. I was taken to a hospital, given real food, clean sheets, antibiotics, and finally, a mirror. It was worse than I imagined. My eyes were sunken. My skin was covered in cuts and mosquito bites. My feet were wrapped in gauze. But I was alive. That same day, I found out something I had feared, but hadn't truly faced. My mother hadn't survived. They told me gently, but I already knew. I had known the moment I touched her arm in the forest. I just hadn't let the truth inside until now. The funeral came soon after. My father, who had spent days with rescue teams searching for the wreckage, held my hand the whole time. His face was lined with pain, but his grip was strong. I stood by the casket and whispered, "Ich habe es geschafft, Mama." I made it, Mama. And then I promised her I'd do something with the life she gave me. Because when you fall from the sky and live, you don't take that lightly. The headlines came quickly. Girl falls 2 miles, survives. Miracle in the Amazon. Juliane Koepcke, the sole survivor. I read them like they were about someone else. Some fictional girl with a sad face and a story too wild to be real. They wrote about the fall, the jungle, the maggots, the hut, but they didn't write about the quiet. They didn't write about how loud the silence can be after a plane disappears around you. They didn't write about the moment your body knows your mother is gone, even before your mind will admit it. Or how trees can look like strangers and friends all at once. People wanted to talk to me. A lot of people. Journalists, doctors, filmmakers, strangers who sent letters to my hospital bed. Some asked if I'd seen God. Others wanted to know if I'd heard the voices of the dead. Someone even asked me if I'd been able to talk to animals. Spoiler, I didn't. They mostly ignored me. I gave a few interviews, smiled politely, told the story again and again as cleanly as I could. Left out the smell, the rot, the crawling things. PG-13 version. People prefer their miracles without too much blood. Here's your historical fact: my survival led to changes in aviation safety standards in Peru. LANSA. The airline ceased operations permanently in 1972, less than a year after the crash. Sometimes it takes a tragedy to ground an entire system. I went back to Germany for a while to recover. My father came with me. I didn't leave the house much. Crowds made my heart race. Loud noises made me freeze. The jungle stayed in my skin long after I left it. Every scratchy sound in the grass, every sudden gust of wind, it all brought me right back. But slowly, the world settled around me again. School helped. Books helped more. I studied biology like my parents. It felt like continuing something, like growing roots from what had been torn out of the earth. I stayed quiet for the most part. There's not much small talk that begins with "I survived falling from the sky." The bizarre fact for today: I once got invited to a talk show where they wanted me to reenact the fall with a green screen and a wind machine. I politely declined. I'm not an action figure. I'm a person. For a long time, I didn't visit the jungle again. I carried it with me anyway. Every dream, every walk near trees, even city parks felt too alive sometimes. But eventually, I went back, not out of obligation, out of something else. A need to see it differently. I joined a team of researchers near Pucallpa. Years had passed. Trees had grown. The wreckage was gone or buried or swallowed. But I walked the rivers again. Not the same ones, but they sounded familiar. like old voices in a new story. I didn't find the exact spot where I landed, but I didn't need to. I found myself there again anyway, stronger, smarter, a little less haunted. Historians still debate whether stories like mine should be told as miracles or warnings. Some call them cautionary tales. Others call them proof of divine intervention. But maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just this. Sometimes people live, even when the odds say they shouldn't, even when everything breaks around them, even when they fall from the sky. I didn't do anything heroic. I didn't climb mountains or slay dragons. I followed water. I stayed awake. I got lucky. And I walked out of the jungle. But the jungle never left me. And that's okay, because it taught me what the world never could. Sometimes I wonder if the reason I survived wasn't just about physics or fate, but because the jungle wanted me to tell its story. I didn't talk about it much in the years that followed. People assumed I'd written it all down, processed it, packaged it up like a best-selling trauma. But no, not really. I buried it deep under biology textbooks and quiet coffee mornings and polite conversations that never drifted toward plains or rainforests or candy wrappers clutched in a teenage fist, until one day I decided to write it down. Not for fame, not for pity, just for truth, for memory, for my mother. Here's your final historical fact. I later published my story as a memoir titled When I Fell from the Sky. It wasn't a survival story with a movie ending. It was a girl's walk through grief instinct and the strange math of being the one who lived. And even now, decades later, I can still hear the hum of the jungle when I close my eyes. I still remember the sound of water over stones, the way sunlight filters through leaves like stained glass, the moment when silence felt like a friend and fear became background noise. People still ask if I believe in miracles. I always pause, not because I don't have an answer, but because it depends on what you mean. If you mean magic in the sky, maybe not. But if you mean the miracle of taking one more step when your legs say no, the miracle of a stranger with a machete whispering Nina like it means something holy, then yes, I do. And the bizarre fact for today, I've come to find comfort in airports. I know, ridiculous. But I stand in line at security and watch planes take off. And I smile. Not because I trust them, but because I remember how fragile everything is and how beautiful that can be. Historians still debate how I survived, but none of them debate that I did. And that to me is enough. So now I speak when I'm asked. I visit schools. I talk to young women who think they're too weak, too small, too scared. And I tell them about the jungle, about the river, about the candy. And I tell them about the girl who fell from the sky and never stopped walking. Let's slow things down now. You've come with me through clouds, through silence, through jungle and memory, through pain and perseverance, through the space between what should have been the end and what somehow became a beginning. Thank you for walking beside me, because this story, it's not just mine. It belongs to anyone who's ever felt alone in the world. Anyone who's faced something too big, too dark, too impossible, and took one small step anyway. It belongs to those who've asked, why me? And also to those who've whispered, why not me? Survival isn't about being fearless. It's about being unfinished. It's about continuing even when the ending seems already written. When I was 17, I fell from the sky. But maybe we all do in some way. Maybe life is a long, strange fall. And survival is learning how to land, not perfectly, but bravely. So if you're listening right now and your world feels too big or too broken, just know this. There is a river somewhere waiting to carry you forward. There is a hut on the edge of nowhere with someone who will help you. And there is a voice in you stronger than you think. Listen to it. Keep walking, because sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin the moment everything else ends. Please like and subscribe if this story moved you. And remember, miracles may not always look like angels. Sometimes they look like muddy shoes and a girl with a scraped up face whispering Ikhleba.